I never thought the happiest day of my life would turn into the moments I learned what betrayal truly looked like. My wedding day, the day I married Jennifer, the woman I thought I'd spend forever with. But standing there, watching my future mother-in-law humiliate my own mother in front of 200 guests, calling her a mistake in a dress, something inside me snapped. Welcome to the Mental Grand, where we share stories of justice, dignity, and the quiet power of patience. What happened next at that wedding would change everything, and by the time the sun set on what should have been my perfect day, an entire family empire would begin to crumble. Stay with me, because this story proves that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting the truth come to light. My name is David Harrison, and 48 hours before my wedding, I was the happiest man alive. I was 35 years old, a senior partner at Morrison and Associates, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in Chicago. I'd worked my way up from intern to partner in 12 years, designed buildings that change skylines, and earned respect in an industry that doesn't give it easily. Jennifer Walsh had walked into my life 3 years earlier at a charity gala. She was beautiful, educated, charming, everything I thought I wanted. Her family owned Walsh Properties, a real estate development company worth somewhere north of $40 million. Her father, Richard Walsh, had built an empire from nothing, or so the story went. Her mother, Patricia Walsh, came from old money, the kind that made you feel poor just by being in the same room. I should have seen the signs earlier. I really should have. The way Patricia looked at my mother during our engagement party, like she was evaluating livestock at a county fair. The subtle comments about my background, always wrapped in a smile so you couldn't quite call it an insult. My father had passed away when I was 16, leaving my mother, Sarah Harrison, to raise me and my younger sister alone. She worked 2 jobs, cleaned offices at night, waited tables during the day, put me through college with scholarships and her own sweat. She was the strongest person I'd ever known, but to Patricia Walsh, she was just a woman who didn't belong in their world. The morning of the wedding, my mother came to my room at the hotel. She looked beautiful in the dress she'd bought, a simple but elegant navy blue that she'd saved 6 months to afford. Her eyes were wet, and I could tell she'd been crying. She held my hands and told me she was so proud of me, that my father would have been proud too. She told me to be happy, to build a good life with Jennifer. I hugged her and promised I would. I had no idea that in a few hours I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about the woman I was about to marry. The ceremony was perfect. Classical music, flowers everywhere, Jennifer looking like something out of a magazine in her $15,000 dress. We said our vows, kissed, and walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. The reception was at the Walsh Estate, a massive property on the North Shore with manicured gardens and a ballroom that could fit half the city. Everything was going smoothly until dinner service. That's when things started to unravel in ways I never could have imagined. I was making the rounds, greeting guests, playing the role of the grateful groom. My mother was seated at a table near the back, not at the family table where she should have been. I'd noticed, but Jennifer had insisted it was a seating chart error, promised to fix it. I should have pushed harder. I was talking to some Jennifer's college friends when I heard raised voices across the room. I turned and saw Patricia Walsh standing over my mother's table, her face twisted in something between disgust and rage. My stomach dropped. I started walking toward them, but the crowd was thick, and by the time I got close enough to hear clearly, the damage was already done. Patricia's voice carried across the ballroom, sharp and cold as a knife. She was holding a glass of champagne, and I could tell by the flush in her cheeks that it wasn't her first. She was looking down at my mother, who sat frozen in her chair, her face pale. Patricia said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear that she tried to be polite, tried to be welcoming, but there were limits. She said some people understood class and breeding, and some people were just mistakes in addresses, pretending to belong somewhere they never would. The words hung in the air like poison. Several guests gasped. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move, didn't speak. She just sat there, absorbing the cruelty, like she had absorbed everything else life had thrown at her. That's when I realized something was very wrong, not just with Patricia, but with this entire family. The way Jennifer's brother Marcus was smirking from across the room, the way Richard Walsh was pretending not to notice, suddenly very interested in his phone, the way Jennifer herself was nowhere to be seen during this moment when her mother was destroying mine. I reached the table and helped my mother up. Her hands were shaking. I looked at Patricia, and for the first time in the 3 years I'd known her, I let her see exactly what I thought of her. I told her that my mother had more class in her little finger than Patricia would ever have in her entire body, and that she'd just shown everyone in this room exactly who she really was. Patricia laughed, actually laughed, and said I was being dramatic. She walked away like nothing had happened, back to her throne at the head table. I took my mother outside, to the garden. She was crying now, quietly, the way she cried when she didn't want to burden anyone with her pain. She apologized to me. Can you believe that? She apologized, said she didn't want to ruin my wedding day, said maybe she should just leave. I held her and told her she had nothing to apologize for, that she was the only person in that entire ballroom that mattered to me. But inside, I was calculating, I was thinking, I was beginning to see patterns I'd ignored, questions I'd never asked, details that suddenly seemed very important. What I didn't know yet was that Patricia's cruelty had just lit a fuse that would blow up their entire world. I got my mother settled in a quiet room inside the house and went looking for Jennifer. I found her in the bridal suite with her bridesmaids, touching up makeup, laughing about something. When I asked if she knew what her mother had just done, she barely looked at me. She said her mother had a few drinks, that I was being too sensitive, that my mother probably misunderstood. Too sensitive, misunderstood. Those words told me everything I needed to know about the woman I just married. I walked out without another word. The reception continued. People danced, ate, drank, celebrated. I played my part, smiled for photos, cut the cake, did the first dance, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, turning over every conversation, every document, every detail of the last 3 years. See, here's what the Walsh family didn't know about me. I wasn't just an architect. Before architecture, I studied finance and law, spent 2 years working in corporate investigation before switching careers. I knew how to read documents, follow money trails, spot inconsistencies in corporate structures. And in the 3 years I'd been with Jennifer, I'd noticed things about Walsh properties that never quite added up. Properties that were purchased at suspiciously low prices, zoning approvals that came through impossibly fast, partnership deals with companies that barely existed on paper. I'd never looked too closely because I trusted Jennifer, trusted her family. But trust was dead now, murdered in a ballroom by a woman who thought she was untouchable. The wedding ended around midnight. Jennifer and I were supposed to leave for our honeymoon to Bali the next morning. Instead, I told her I needed to go to my office, that I forgot to finish something important. She barely protested, said she was exhausted anyway, went to bed in the bridal suite at their parents' house. I drove to my office in downtown Chicago, and I started digging. If you're enjoying this story of justice and patience, stay with me until the end. You won't believe what I uncovered in those files. And if stories like this speak to you, hit that subscribe button for the mental grant, because we believe that dignity and respect matter, no matter who you are or where you come from. I spent the entire night in my office, pulling up every public record I could access about Walsh properties, property deeds, tax records, LLC filings, partnership agreements. I had some advantages here. Morrison and Associates had worked on 2 projects with Walsh Properties, which meant I had legitimate access to certain files and contacts. I also had friends in city planning, in the assessor's office, people who owed me favors. By sunrise, I had a picture forming, and it was uglier than I had imagined. Walsh Properties wasn't built on Richard Walsh's business genius. It was built on fraud, corruption, and a network of shell companies designed to hide money and avoid taxes. Here's what I found. Over the last 15 years, Walsh Properties had purchased at least 23 properties in Chicago and the suburbs at prices far below market value. These weren't distressed sales or foreclosures. These were properties bought from shell companies that Richard Walsh himself controlled, creating artificial sales that minimized tax liability and inflated the asset value on paper. It's called self-dealing, and it's illegal. Beyond that, I found evidence of at least 4 instances where Walsh properties had received zoning variances and building permits that should never have been approved. The properties didn't meet code, didn't meet density requirements, didn't meet environmental standards, yet somehow they sailed through the approval process. That meant someone was being paid off, probably multiple someones. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. I found records showing that Walsh Properties had partnerships with 3 development companies. 2 of those companies didn't actually exist beyond paperwork. They were registered addresses that led to empty offices, phone numbers that went to voicemail, no employees, no projects besides the ones with Walsh Properties. Money was flowing into these ghost companies and disappearing. It was money laundering disguised as legitimate business. Richard Walsh had been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a real estate empire, and everyone in Chicago's development community had just accepted it because he threw good parties and donated to the right political campaigns. But here's where it got personal, and here's where my architectural expertise became dangerous to them. 6 months earlier, Morrison and Associates had been hired to design a mixed-use development in the South Loop. The client was listed as Harrison Development, LLC. I thought it was a coincidence, the name Harrison. Turns out it wasn't. I pulled the corporate filings and discovered that Harrison Development, LLC was owned by a trust, and that trust listed me as the primary beneficiary. Someone had created a shell company in my name without my knowledge or permission. That someone was Richard Walsh, and he'd used that company to purchase a contaminated industrial site that should never have been approved for residential development. The implications hit me like a freight train. If that development went forward and people got sick from the contaminated soil, I would be legally liable. My name was on the company. My career would be destroyed. I could face criminal charges. The Walsh family had set me up as their fall guy, insurance in case their scheme ever came to light. And Jennifer had known. She had to have known. She'd been the one who introduced me to that project, who insisted Morrison and Associates take the contract, who had access to all my personal information needed to forge corporate documents. The woman I'd married 12 hours earlier had helped her family frame me for crimes I didn't commit. I sat in my office as the sun came up over Lake Michigan, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to Bali. I wasn't going to pretend this marriage was real. I was going to burn their entire empire to the ground, legally and completely. But I was going to be smart about it. Emotional revenge is satisfying for a moment, but legal revenge lasts forever. I started making phone calls, first to my lawyer, Martin Chen, one of the best corporate attorneys in Chicago. I explained what I'd found and what had been done in my name. Martin's voice went cold and focused, the way it does when he smells blood in the water. He told me not to confront anyone, not to tip them off, to let him handle the legal strategy. Second, I called the FBI field office and asked to speak to someone in white-collar crime. That raised some eyebrows, but I had enough evidence to get a meeting scheduled for Monday morning. Third, and this was the call that mattered most, I called my mother. It was 6:30 in the morning. She was already awake, probably hadn't slept well after what happened. I told her I loved her, that I was sorry for what Patricia had done, and that she needed to trust me for the next few days, because things were about to get complicated. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was better than okay. I told her that sometimes the people who think they're untouchable are the ones who fall the hardest, and that she was about to see exactly what her son was capable of when someone hurt the people he loved. I could hear the smile in her voice when she said she always knew I had my father's strength in me. Jennifer called me around 9 that morning, annoyed that I hadn't come back to the house. She asked where I was, said we were going to miss our flight. I told her we needed to talk, that I'd found some things about her family's business that concerned me. There was a pause, too long, too calculated. Then she laughed it off, said I was being paranoid, that we could talk about boring business stuff after the honeymoon. I told her I wasn't going to Bali. I told her I wanted to meet with her and her parents that afternoon, all of us together. She stopped laughing. She asked what this was about. I said she signed out soon enough and hung up. That's when I knew for certain she was involved, because an innocent person would have been confused, would have asked questions. Jennifer was scared. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock at the Walsh estate. I arrived with Martin Chen and a briefcase full of documents. Richard, Patricia, and Jennifer were waiting in Richard's home office, a ridiculous room with leather furniture and expensive art that probably cost more than most people make in a lifetime. Marcus was there too, leaning against the wall with his trademark smirk. Richard started with the friendly routine, asked if we could reschedule this meeting until after the honeymoon, said there was no rush to discuss business. I opened the briefcase and spread documents across his desk: property deeds, LLC filings, bank statements, emails I'd found in the shared files from our project together. I told them exactly what I'd discovered, every detail, every crime, every piece of fraud. The room went silent. Patricia's face lost all its color. Marcus stopped smirking. Richard looked at the documents like they were a cancer diagnosis. Jennifer tried to play it off, said there must be a mistake, some explanation. I looked at her, this woman I'd been ready to spend my life with, and asked her directly if she knew they'd created a company in my name. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I told them that I'd already spoken to the FBI, that I had a meeting scheduled for Monday morning to turn over everything I'd found. I told them that I'd also contacted the Illinois Attorney General's office, the Chicago Department of Planning, and every media outlet that would listen. I told them their empire was over. Richard tried to negotiate. Of course he did. Men like him always think everything has a price. He offered me money, first $100,000, then $500,000, then a full partnership in Walsh Properties if I'd just forget what I'd found. He said we were family now, that family protected each other. I laughed at that. I told him that my mother worked herself to the bone to raise me with integrity, that she taught me what real family meant, and that Patricia's cruelty was the biggest mistake of their lives, because if they'd just treated my mother with basic respect, I might never have looked too closely at their business. Sometimes karma doesn't come from the universe. Sometimes it comes from the son of the woman you humiliated, and sometimes it comes with FBI agents and handcuffs. Patricia tried a different approach. She actually apologized, said she was drinking, said things she didn't mean. She even cried, these theatrical tears that might have worked on someone who didn't see her exactly for who she was. I told her her apology meant nothing to me, but she was welcome to save it for the federal prosecutor. Jennifer begged. That was hard to watch, not because I felt sorry for her, but because it confirmed that the woman I'd loved had never really existed. She was just a role Jennifer played, a character designed to trap someone useful. She grabbed my arm, said we could work this out, said she loved me. I removed her hand and told her I'd be filing for annulment Monday morning on the grounds of fraud. Martin had already drawn up the papers. We left them there, in that office, their perfect world cracking apart. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired and done with all of them. The FBI meeting that Monday was thorough. I spent 4 hours walking 2 agents through everything I'd found. They were particularly interested in the shell companies and the zoning fraud, said it connected to a larger investigation they'd been running on corruption in Chicago's development sector. By Wednesday, federal warrants were issued. By Friday, Richard Walsh, Patricia Walsh, and Marcus Walsh were arrested. Jennifer wasn't charged initially, but she was named as a person of interest. Walsh Properties went into receivership. Assets were frozen. The news media had a field day with it. Old money family exposed as frauds, that kind of headline. The legal process took months. I cooperated fully with the investigation, turned over everything I had. The corporation I'd supposedly owned was dissolved, my name cleared from any liability. Richard eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and money laundering. He got 8 years in federal prison. Patricia was charged as an accomplice and got 3 years. Marcus took a deal and testified against his father, got probation and community service. Jennifer filed for divorce before I could file the annulment, probably trying to save face. I didn't contest it. She moved to California, last I heard, changed her name, trying to disappear from the scandal. The Walsh estate was sold to pay restitution and legal fees. Everything they built, gone. My mother asked me once if I regretted any of it, if I wished I'd just let it go and moved on with my life. I told her the truth, that I regretted marrying Jennifer, regretted not seeing who they really were sooner, but I didn't regret destroying them. Some people think revenge is wrong, that it makes you as bad as the people who hurt you.
I disagree. Justice isn't revenge. Justice is making sure that people who abuse power, who hurt others, who believe rules don't apply to them, finally face consequences. Patricia Walsh thought she could humiliate a woman who worked her whole life to give her son a future, thought there would be no price to pay for that cruelty. She was wrong. They all were. I rebuilt my life after that. Morrison and Associates stood by me, actually promoted me to senior partner after the dust settled. My reputation in the architecture community grew because I'd been willing to blow the whistle, even when it cost me personally. I designed 3 major projects in the next 2 years, won awards, made more money than I ever had with the Walsh connection. But more importantly, I rebuilt my sense of who I was and what I stood for. I'd let Jennifer and her family make me feel like I needed their approval, their world, their version of success. My mother never needed any of that, and she was stronger and happier than any of them ever were. About a year after everything fell apart, I took my mother to dinner at one of the nicest restaurants in Chicago. We sat by the window overlooking the river, and I gave her a gift, a small box. Inside was a deed to a house, a beautiful 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood, paid for in full. She cried, told me it was too much. I told her it wasn't nearly enough, that she'd given me everything, and this was just the beginning of paying her back. She asked if I was happy. I realized I was genuinely happy for the first time in years, free from people who looked at me as a tool, surrounded by real friends and family who valued me for who I was, not what I could do for them. My mother is 72 now, retired, happy, surrounded by grandchildren from my sister, and eventually from Rachel and me. She still lives in that house I bought her, tends a garden that would make you weep, it's so beautiful. She never talks about the wedding, about Patricia, about
Any of it. That's her grace, her ability to let go of bitterness. But I remember. I'll always remember. Not because I'm stuck in the past, but because that moment taught me who I was and what I was capable of when someone threatened the people I loved. Patricia Walsh called my mother a mistake in a dress. She was wrong about that, wrong about everything. The only mistake was thinking a woman's worth could be measured in designer labels and country club memberships. My mother's worth was measured in calloused hands and sacrificed sleep and unconditional love. That's real class. That's real power. And in the end, that's what won.